It's about being aware of what's okay with you and what's not okay with you, and being confident enough to be able to stand out there in the space where you're going to set a boundary. Successful people learn how to make their mind work for them. I'm David Nagel, and this is the Successful Mind Podcast. So when do we speak up and draw a boundary for ourselves, a line in the sand, so to speak, when somebody is crossing a boundary with us, crossing an area that is making us uncomfortable, doing something that is not okay with us? This is the question. And the answer comes in a lot of forms based on when and how somebody actually crosses a boundary or an area that should be a boundary, and in what is the context in which they do so. Is it in a group setting? Is it behind your back? Is it to your face? Is it at work? Is it at home? And how do we deal with it? And so I'm going to just tell you a quick little story to represent something that I saw one time that I took into my own life as a value and a way to handle this that has made a tremendous difference. The story is this. I was in Rome having dinner with some friends, and the wine was flowing. Everybody was having a really good time. One person started probably having a little bit too much wine and began to talk about another person sitting at the table to this person about how they should not be doing something in their life. And it doesn't matter what it was. It doesn't matter why. The point is that the individual took it upon themselves to basically say you should not be doing this thing in your life. And the person who was the recipient of that directive put her hand up, like in the stop mode, and said this: I am not now, nor will I ever be open for this conversation. And immediately shut it down right there. And I thought, oh, I like that. That was really good. Most of us are only taught so much about boundaries when we're a kid. If we had parents, and this is one of the weird things about it actually, because there are some things that your parents might not be good at, yet they still can teach you pretty well. Boundaries is not one of them. If a parent has weak boundaries, meaning that they allow people to step over a boundary with them, or they're constantly stepping over boundaries with other people, which I consider weak boundaries on both sides of that coin, they're not going to be able to teach you how to have good boundaries. So chances are you'll have weak boundaries. And then we have to go through life experiencing what it's like for somebody to kind of just step right in a sense, or on an extreme end, bully us into some kind of intimidation or manipulative tactic. And we don't have the tools to look that person in the eye and cause whatever it is that's happening to actually stop. So then what ends up happening is it eats away at our self-esteem. And I think that for all the listeners out there, it's really important to know that when you don't have boundaries, when you don't have good solid boundaries for yourself, or if you're a person who crosses over boundaries with other people, that the recipient of boundary crossing on a regular basis just chisels away at our self-esteem very often till there's nothing left. So the question then is how, when, why, who do we change boundaries? I think the first thing that a person should look at is what is your own value system? Where do you need to have boundaries in your life? I mean, we all have some of the obvious ones where, like inappropriate touching or inappropriate comments, rude comments, manipulative comments, people gossiping, backstabbing, butting in. Like those are all very obvious places where a firm boundary needs to be drawn. But if a person is actually going to develop the skill set to set good boundaries in their life, they really need to examine their life and say, where do I have boundaries around everything? And the only way to do that is to really look at your life and look at your values. Like, what are your values around this? Because we don't want to go through life like either being a steamroller in somebody else's life or having somebody else do that. So when you look at your value system, it's kind of like asking yourself, where is it that the walls need to be kind of rebuilt in my life to keep out things that I don't want in my life? Because factually, like the people that have the most power to step over boundaries are usually people that we love and care about. They're the people that have the most access to us generally, and they're the individuals that very often where I see this is the biggest problem. So here's where the value part comes in. When you're looking at somebody who is crossing a boundary with you, they're doing it for some reason on their end. They want something from you, or they want to do something to you. So the question is, why would you let them to begin with? Even if you weren't raised with good boundaries, why would you let someone step in to that part of your life, break down that wall and step in and do any kind of damage or disruption? Frequently, it comes from low self-esteem to begin with, where a person has not got themselves to the awareness of the idea that they don't owe anybody anything. So this is a very important value add to a person's life. With the exception of our children, we don't owe anybody anything. The first thing that we have to address is, how do we want our life to be? And when we address how do we want our life to be, we begin to design it with the ideal of what we want in mind, and how do we want it to be now? How do we want it to be futuristically? Also coming from the place of, what do I enjoy in my life? How do I want to spend my time? How much money do I want to make? How do I want to express myself sexually? All of these different, what do I want to do for a living, right? What is a legacy that I want to leave for myself? All of these ideas cause us to really sit around and think about, what is the creation scenario that we need to create with family, with friends, with work, with partners, whatever it might be, in order to create the outcome that we want. So we've got this image in our mind of what we want to do. Now, we have to understand that when we do that, we're changing, we're moving, we're growing. It has this unique ability to upset other people when we start to do this. And what I mean by that is that any time that we are making a change in our life, we're forcing other people around us to change. And I was talking with this about this the other day to a person, and I was basically explaining to them what I was taught around this, that people just don't like to have change forced upon them, and every single person does this unique thing with people in their life. They kind of compartmentalize them in a psychological, emotional box in their mind. So what we do is we get to the place where we know this person. We kind of know their behavior, how they're going to act, how they think, what they're going to do, what they're not going to do, what their good points are, what their faults might be. We may have known these people all of our lives. We may have known them for a few years, whatever it might be. And when that person begins to change, our subconscious mind does not know how to perceive the change. All it knows is that there's a change taking place. And when that change is actually taking place, the subconscious mind's red flag warning goes up, and it basically says unknown. So unknown to the subconscious mind, like there's this weird thing that the subconscious mind does where it kind of links that up with death in a way, because the subconscious mind is only concerned about keeping you alive in the moment in this scenario. So the subconscious mind doesn't know that this person doesn't have an intention to harm you in any way. It's just that it's recognizing that this person is changing. So it sends up some kind of a warning signal with that. That warning signal makes us feel uncomfortable. And when it makes us feel uncomfortable, we have a tendency to want to do something to stop the thing that's making us uncomfortable from doing whatever that thing actually is. And this is an area, this is like a representation of an area where a person will break a boundary because they may say something to you, they may do something, they may have a passive-aggressive attitude, whatever it might be. And then because you're changing, you have to step in and say, this is not okay with me. So the idea is that we've got the self-esteem to say to these people that this, whatever this is that's going on, this is not okay with me because I'm in a place psychologically, emotionally mature enough to understand what I want in my life and what I don't want in my life. These things happen in different times, different scenarios. Like I said, it could be alone, it could be one-on-one, it could be in a work environment, it could be a social environment, it can be a family environment. How do we do this in a way where it's actually appropriate? Well, depending on the environment that you're in, you may have to stop it right there in front of everybody. Now, I will say this, it may make everybody uncomfortable for you to do that, but in many scenarios, it's not a bad thing to show that you're not going to be bullied by other individuals. It may also be appropriate that you take the person aside and have a private conversation with them and say that it's not okay to do this. But the idea is that we stop the behavior, as soon as it sticks, its ugly head up. It's a very interesting scenario when you're in that experience, because when you're in it, and my mind is it's like going to 100 different places with this at the same time. When you're in that scenario, somebody is breaking a boundary. You know that they're doing something or they're headed in a direction that is not okay. And your mind starts to scramble for, what do I do with this? We should already have pre-thought and preset in our mind exactly what we're going to do with it when it shows up. I tell people here is a social strategy that we should apply everywhere in our life. We pre-think the scenarios that we're walking into, whether you're going to dinner or you're going on a date or you're spending family time, or it's the holiday season and you're going to be around a lot of people and you know that there's issues there. You pre-think this going into these scenarios. It could be work environment. And you say to yourself, if somebody crosses a boundary, not knowing what boundary could be crossed, unless it's with family and it's happened many times, then you probably know, but not knowing what boundary could be crossed under what topic, how are you going to handle it if somebody crosses a boundary? Now, I remember saying that to somebody one time, and they were like, really? I need to think about this every time I go into some place? And it's like, you do, and here's the reason that you do. Had you been taught this as a child, it would be a natural skill set for you to use in a scenario whenever it came up, and you wouldn't feel uncomfortable using it. But it's the idea that you weren't taught that and you don't have it, that you now have to develop that so that you can use it. And so, but if you're caught unawares by a situation, then there's a problem, because now it's kind of got you on the back foot, so to speak, and you don't feel confident about how to handle it. And your mind runs into, is it appropriate? Is it embarrassing? Do I feel bullied in this situation? Am I afraid of the ramifications of setting a boundary? All of that kind of stuff comes up. So we have to pre-think these things as we're going into situations. And then when something happens, we have to stand up for ourselves and set that boundary. And here's the other thing. It does not matter who it's with. Like, it really doesn't matter who it's with. Nobody has the right to cross a boundary that you're setting for yourself. Now, let me take this conversation a little bit further down the road here. That's basically in a situation, I don't want to say strangers, but it's in a situation where it's more of a gathering of some sort. In other words, it's not really an intimate interaction with someone. So let's talk about an intimate interaction with another individual. You have a friend, a partner, a lover, a business partner, even your children or your parents. Those situations are more intimate. We deal with those people much differently. So a conversation about values, a conversation about expectations, a conversation about what I want out of this relationship, about what I have to offer in this relationship, about how do I get my needs met. Having these conversations with other individuals eliminates a lot of the problems with boundaries. I think one of the big problems that we see with people that are in love relationships together is that they never have this conversation to begin with. And by not having this conversations, boundaries get crossed. And in order to keep the peace, especially if you're a person who has an issue with conflict, nothing is said. But then with nothing being said, then resentments build up. And as the resentments build up, the deterioration of the love relationships, it starts to begin to deteriorate over a period of time. And it all comes from, number one, never having the conversation to begin with. Number two, not really having a conversation about what my boundaries are in life to begin with. So I think that, it's a huge thing right now in our environment, like socially. We hear about it constantly. People's lives are being destroyed because they did not know how to maintain good boundaries, and they crossed boundaries. And we're also hearing about people that are coming out years later after a boundary was crossed with them and now talking about it, but they didn't at the time because they didn't have the ability to set good boundaries for themselves either. So this is a very big topic. I'm really a huge proponent of really understanding yourself. It's definitely another area around self-awareness. It's about being aware of what's okay with you and what's not okay with you, and being confident enough to be able to stand out there in the space where you're going to set a boundary. So that was like the experience that I had in Rome. Could this person have taken it behind the scenes? They probably could have, but here's the problem with it. It would not have stopped it in the immediate. And where that conversation was going in the immediate was not in a good place. And one of the reasons was it was a little alcohol involved. And the other thing was that it was done as a direct attack to the individual that it was being directed at. So that person needed to stop it in the immediate. And the way that it was done was firm, it was abrupt, but it wasn't dramatic. So the idea was that she basically stopped the conversation right where it was and did not continue as to why or apologizing or saying, look, I'm not trying to hurt your feelings, or there was no drama that was brought into it. And I think from a skill set, it's very important to understand that this does not have to be a big dramatization. It just needs to be that you're getting your message across in a very clear and concise way, that you're communicating both verbally and energetically to another individual that whatever it is that they're doing needs to stop immediately. So what do we do if they ignore us? Or what do they do if they push back? Or they start to challenge us? Or they start to bully us because we set a boundary? In almost all cases, the best thing to do is to get up and leave. Don't say a word. Get up and actually remove yourself from the situation. Because believe it or not, that's not running away. That is setting a boundary. That's saying, I do not now, nor do I ever want to have this conversation with you. And because you will not abide by my boundary of not wanting to have that conversation, I am removing myself from this situation. And you can always go back later and say, this is not appropriate for me, that I'm not interested in engaging in this, and I am asking you not to do it again. If you do it again, then I'm going to have to remove myself from the relationship altogether. So I think that it's very appropriate to do those things, and it's very, very necessary. I also think that it sets a tone for your own self-esteem in life, and it builds your self-esteem by being able to do this so that other people know exactly where you stand. What's important to know about that, people that actually have respect for you, they will respect that action. And it doesn't matter if they agree, they'll respect it. People that don't have any respect for you will play the victim card in this situation, and they'll create drama, but what it does is it really sends that warning signal up for you to really know that it's probably not somebody that you want in your life to begin with. I think that it's always appropriate to set a boundary. How forceful, how abrupt, really depends on the situation. If it's a dangerous situation, if something is really being violated that should not be violated, it may have to be done more forcefully. It may have to be done more loudly. It may need to be done with a walk away anyway, no matter what, you're walking away from the situation. And I've talked about this in toxic relationships very frequently, where, setting boundaries with toxic people is, you have to do it hard and fast. Because if you don't do that, if you give them one edge in, then they'll always be going over that line with you. So it's extremely important that you stand up for yourself and you say, this line I will not allow to be crossed, period. End of story. Done. Over. Not happening. People that consistently break boundaries have a bit of bullying going on in them in many cases, manipulation. And what they don't want is they don't want to be around somebody that's going to stop that. So if they don't break you down, in other words, get you to cave in on your boundary, they will move on to someone else. It's fascinating how that happens. But it's the only way to get it to stop. So that's what my advice is around this. So we get a lot of these questions around the holiday season, before and after, and the idea is that it's always appropriate to set boundaries. It's really great if you can set them ahead of time in a situation, if it's a personal situation, romantic, family, that type of thing. But in social situations or work situations, if something is grievously happening right there, you need to do it. You need to do it right there. There's just absolutely no room for it to be crossed. So if you're a person who has not done this, I recommend that you start doing it immediately in your life, and you build it up as a skill set, and you build it up as a muscle. And also, another thing would be is to pay attention in conversations and social situations and watch how other people set boundaries, because boundaries can be set in ways where it doesn't have to be dramatic. I suppose it's always confrontational when you actually set a boundary, but confrontation's not a bad thing, right? It's drama is the thing that drags those things out. So do it. Pay attention. Watch other people. Learn how they do it, and you get comfortable doing it yourself. All right, that's what we got for today. Thanks for listening to the Successful Mind podcast. And if you like what you heard and you want to know more, go to davidnagel.com/free stuff.